All right. Hello and welcome everyone to our Valid Thoughts webinar series where we discuss emerging trends in model risk management, AI governance, and beyond. I'm Kevin Allen. I'm head of marketing for ValidMind today. If you have any questions, feel free to ask those in the chat. I'm thrilled to welcome ValidMind CEO Jonas Jacobi and our newest addition to the ValidMind Advisory Board, Jan Larsen. Jan is the former president and head of CRISIL Integral IQ. Jan, Jonas, over to you.
Thank you, Kevin. Hi, John. It's great to have you here. Good to see you again. We have some interesting topics to discuss today, so I'm looking forward to hear what you have to say. And obviously, as Kevin said, welcome to the ValidMind team. We're excited to have you aboard as an advisor for the company.
No, thank you very much. I'm very excited to be part of this journey. I think it's going to be critical in enabling our clients to really get the full advantage of the new tools that are making analytics and business processes more effective and more efficient than ever.
Yeah, I mean the speed of evolution right now regards to AI, and obviously I guess both of us are sort of hinting towards the fact that Gen AI is evolving and the use of AI is evolving. And we now see the conversations with the larger companies like Amazon, Google, Anthropic, and OpenAI coming up with standard communication protocols for agents and other things that are very exciting. But also, if we're looking at model risk, can be quite challenging, especially if you are a financial institution, a bank here in the US or in other countries, UK, Canada. How do we, and I think, a lot of the conversations that we're going to have today is really around how do we introduce AI and the efficiencies that it can bring into the MRM process for, say, traditional models and frameworks. I mean, what are the? I mean, if you're looking at it from your perspective, so what's the challenge that you have seen clients and partners and your colleagues struggle with when it comes to MRM, even for traditional models?
Sure. So it's a great question. And a lot of the issues that actually challenge banks in the traditional MRM space actually extend themselves into the broader issues of AI adoption. So I think we're going to see a lot of parallels between this discussion and what comes next on the AI front. One of the big issues is really a skill deficit, right? Model risk management involves, particularly on the validation side, involves a lot of highly technical work, right? You need people who are extremely fluent in statistics and mathematics, often at a PhD level. There's a limited supply of people with those qualifications. And frankly, the people with those qualifications have very, very broad career opportunities, right? So you're immediately at a skill disadvantage, right? The other issue is that validation, while extremely important, model risk management more broadly, while extremely important, is fundamentally a cost center, and it's very difficult to attribute profit to it, right? So between the fact that you're dealing with very scarce and very expensive employees, and the fact that this is viewed as a cost center, and there's always scrutiny on cost center budgets, right? You end up with large bottlenecks in MRM. And I've seen a lot of consequences of that. So one consequence is banks very often have a tremendous focus on rationalizing the model inventory, right? So, a plainer English way of saying that is somebody comes along, a CRO comes along or whatnot, and says, wait a minute, why do we have 200 models in the bank? Figure out a way to get this done with 150, or figure it out how to get it done with 100, right? Because that in itself will reduce your cost of maintenance, ongoing validation and monitoring quite a bit. Now, that makes sense in the modern construct that a CRO or a COO would look at the problem that way. The problem is that in a world that's moving increasingly quickly, in a world where risk is becoming much more opaque, much more dynamic, there's a real risk if your focus is on making your model inventory less granular, that you really lose a lot of insight into risk and opportunity, right? So that's one big issue. Another is you see models oftentimes very infrequently updated, because the update will typically trigger a more scrutinous model review process than if you're simply revalidating a model that's already in production, right? So just to give you an example of that, in my experience, it's not uncommon for credit risk models in particular to survive as long as a decade or even more, right? Now, again, you don't have to be a news junkie to see the world's moving a lot faster now than it was, 5 years ago, right? So that kind of stasis in how institutions measure risk really becomes very risky in and of itself, because there's a very high risk that models that are trained to interpret risks as they existed, say, pre-COVID, are well attuned to discerning risk in a post-COVID, post-tariff, post-global breakup type scenario, right? So
Yeah.
that's another issue. And related to that, and I'm sorry, I've gone on too long,
No,
but just
no,
related
this
to
is
that.
great. This is great. Yeah. So
Yeah, I'm just going to make one more point, I promise. Very much related to that, existing MRM processes tend to discourage innovation and model development, right? So, at various points in my career, at various firms that I've worked for, I've overseen teams doing model development projects for banks. And a very, very common piece of customer feedback is, don't mess with the functional form. Just like, update a couple of variables, right? Maybe we use the quick ratio instead of some other liquidity measure this time around, but don't mess with the functional form or anything like that, because then, the validation is not going to be 3 months, it's going to be 6, and we don't have that much time, right?
but that sort of we're getting to the cultural later, but
Yeah.
wouldn't that also impact innovation on the MRM process itself?
No, very likely.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, very likely. I think that's a very good point, right? So when you have a process that is resource constrained, expansive, where it's difficult to attribute positive business value, even though we all know it's there, right? Then it almost inherently becomes a bottleneck, and it almost inherently stymies innovation, right? So figuring out ways to automate that, get it more efficient, so that the people, as great as they are, we love the people, don't get us wrong, the people become less of a bottleneck to the evolution of risk modeling in the bank, the better off the institution's going to be, right?
Yeah. So what have you seen then in the market as triggers, if I put it that way, that would entice someone that is sitting in that position right now and trying to figure out, to your point, right, that in the past we could let models continue for a very long time as in production, whereas now with AI we're starting to see a change in how frequent we need to reassess these models or validate these models. Do you see a path for someone sitting there and trying to figure this out? How do I adopt AI? I have this inventory that was designed for traditional statistical models, and now I'm being asked and pressured from my peers in the bank to speed up the process. I need to find ways to feel confident that I can actually do my job, because as you and I know, although in some cases it's seen as a cost center, model risk professionals can provide an enormous amount of strategic value to the bank, if tooled right and with enough resources, right? So what do you see as those are the trigger points that can help me, or the resources that can help me as a model risk professional to get into this new world and be confident that I'll produce the outcomes that are quite required by me, by regulatory guidelines. So what can I do? What's the solution?
So within the context of getting efficiencies in those workflows for just validating or model risk managing the traditional models, right? There are a huge number of efficiencies that AI can bring into that process today, without the bank having to be AI experts themselves, right? So, just for example, some low-hanging fruit. First draft model documentation. AI is very well suited to that, particularly, if it is able to leverage pre-existing blocks of text, right? So if I'm running an accuracy ratio on a model, I know I'm always going to have to explain the accuracy ratio, right? So that's low-hanging fruit. Validation reports, similarly, Gen AI can be a great resource for getting you to that first draft faster. Is the validator always going to want to read that? Are they going to want to tinker with it? Yes, of course. But I think, we've all had the experience that it's much faster to work with a first draft than to write from scratch, right? So that's just low-hanging fruit. AI has the ability to run many standard model and validation tests, right? So if you have an AI assistant and you can say, hey, this is my data set, this is my model specification, run me an accuracy ratio, a t-test, Pearson correlation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? It's very well adept at that, right? So that's all very low-hanging fruit that today can deliver, immediate efficiency gains, alleviate some of the log jams that inevitably come up in an MRM department, right? And also enable the bank to model more granularly, update models more frequently, et cetera, because that log jam's been cleared.
So that begs there's obviously two questions there. Right? One I think we're going to get into later, but the one that pops out then, if I'm the MRM model risk individual, it sounds great, but who is validating and signing off on the AI that I will be using to make sure that the material that I produce as part of the regulatory requirements are correct, right? So would that be, do you see that as a fully like AI doing 100% of that, or do you see it more like a human in the loop providing supervision, if I call it that way, to make sure that whatever is being presented is accurate and in line?
Yeah. So this is, I think, one of the million-dollar questions in any application of AI in business, but particularly in a highly regulated business like a bank. It's the accountability question.
Yeah.
Right. So will this require some updates to the bank's own governance policies? Absolutely. Absolutely. If in the past your accountability was producing accurate models, accurate validation tests, accurate model documentation, accurate validation reports. That's still effectively your job, regardless of the fact that you're using new tools, right? But of course, it does require a little bit of familiarity with the tools themselves, right? Like you have to be an effective checker.
Have you seen? Have you seen any? Have you seen the change? I can tell you what what we saw early on was that there was sort of strong pushback initially for
Mm-hmm.
the use of Gen AI, not just for model risk professionals, but in general that we don't want to see this. And then
Mm-hmm.
I think over the past year, I think there's a shift going on that people are getting a little bit more confidence in their ability to maybe not understand completely what's going into the actual LLM model itself, but at least an understanding of that. Here's what it's good for. Here's what it's where the value is. Here's what we can use it for, and here's where the things that we need to be watching out for. Is that something that you've seen? Or
Absolutely. So in early to mid 2023, I saw a very wide distribution of attitudes towards AI in banking, right? There, on one end of the spectrum, there was a lot of skepticism and reticence. A lot of this is never going to work. On the other end of the spectrum, there was a huge amount. There was a camp of people who were very optimistic about the potential for AI to improve customer service efficiency ratios, you name it. Okay, I think that dichotomy persisted for roughly a year or so. Just an anecdote. I think it was winter between 2023 and 2024. I met with somebody who was overseeing the AI efforts at a large global bank, and he himself was skeptical, right? Recently, I met with an executive for another global bank and learned that they have a lab where they're experimenting with building digital employees. So I think if there was a distribution, a fat-tailed distribution of views a year to year and a half ago, it's now very much more clustered towards this is happening. This is the future. Do we know exactly what that future looks like today? No, but there's definitely something there. 2 years ago, the question was, is there anything here or not? Now there's something here. We might have different views on what it is, but there's something here.
So do you see that there's how would I call it, a set of winner? I wouldn't call it the winners and losers, but do you see that there's there's a risk for a little bit of a knowledge gap, or I would call it like a adoption gap between say the early adopters that may not taking on unnecessary risk, but that are investing heavily in this, and they are trying to solve the challenge of the model risk management process to make it more in line with sort of the direction that the industry is going with the use of AI, Gen AI, and obviously we have now with we have AI agents, right? So do you see that there's the risk that some will be sort of left behind and will have a hard time catching up, or what's the where's the tension for the adoption of Gen AI and sort of the evolution of AI?
So I think there absolutely is that risk, and where just from a personal perspective, where I really worry is some of the mid-sized and smaller banks, right? Because they're already, they've always been at a huge cost of funding disadvantage. Now you're potentially layering a massive efficiency ratio disadvantage on top of that cost of funding disadvantage, right? But even if you're a big bank, there are big banks that are further ahead than others. Of course, I'm not going to name names, but I know that from direct observation. So that's an issue. I would say even the banks that are furthest ahead In fact, I would go even further. The banks who are furthest ahead are very well aware of the fact that if they don't keep running in this direction, they're susceptible to outside disruption, right?
Yeah.
If even the largest banks don't effectively become, more or less fintechs, right? The risk is that a AI native organization or organizations could emerge and capture their market maybe a lot quicker than they think.
Mm. So with with the adoption of or the sort of emergence, I would call it, of Gen AI, then sort of in the banking industry. So what are what do you see as the top challenges for MRM to resolve? Right, we've talked a little bit about process, which is a high level, right? Process. We talked a little bit about where it can help out, and we talked about documentation and validation. But but there are challenges. We know that. So can you give me a little bit of a sense of what you've seen in the industry in terms of challenges?
Sure. So there are practical challenges and there are technical challenges. Okay, I think I'm not quite sure what mix of technical backgrounds we have in the audience, but I think I'm going to spend a lot more time on the practical challenges, but maybe make an allusion or two to technical challenges. On the practical side, we already talked about how overwhelmed MRM departments tend to be today, and how it tends to be a real bottleneck in model deployment. Right? One sign of how powerful AI is the range of applications within the banking context is so vast. Now you're starting to see MRM desks get inundated with even more models than ever before, right? So that's one very practical challenge. So, and again, that goes back to the need to really look at opportunities to get efficiency into the process, right? It also speaks to the need to have very good risk prioritization, right? Let's make sure we're spending 80% of our time on the 20% of the highest risk models in the bank, right? Another very fundamental challenge is just the skill deficit, right? For right now, this will change. This will change. But for right now, just like in the late 70s, basic desktop computer facility was a scarce skill. For right now, AI facility is a scarce skill. That will change because it will have to, because frankly, white collar professionals who don't become fluent in AI are going to have a very hard time for themselves, right? But for right now, it's a very real skill deficit. And if I'm going to be fully candid, apologies to all on the line, but the best and brightest AI talent today tends to be looking in places other than banking, right? So that's another fundamental issue that will change. And I think it'll change faster than people think it will, because it's just going to have to.
So how do you look at that from, my experience is also that people that are, when there's a new technology coming out, the people that want in and want to work on it is usually on the, let's call it the creative side. How would I, as a model risk individual, encourage people to come over to my side? What do I need to do to help recruit the talent that you need? I mean, the MRM function is so critical, right? So how do you recruit to that function, the right talent, to your point?
Some of it's going to be recruiting. A lot of it's going to be upskilling. In the short term, my personal view, and I may be wrong or right about this, but my personal view is it's likely much easier to upskill existing MRM talent on AI than to pluck people out of the AI world and upskill them on MRM. MRM's fairly niche. It has a fairly specific catalog of mathematical requirements, et cetera. The people who are already in that space, I think it's going to be easier for them to climb the AI curve as far as they need to, rather than compete with OpenAI for talent. Right? That's my personal view, and maybe when we get to questions from the audience, there are going to be people with counterexamples, which is terrific. So I think upskilling is part of it, but then again, we're talking about departments that tend not to have a lot of time on their hands, so prioritizing, creating that space for them to be upskilled also becomes very important, and that's fundamentally a management issue.
Yeah. So but that brings us really to I guess the third question, or the third sort of dive into topic. Because you touched on it quite a few times. We're talking about upskilling staff, recruiting, change, right? And with change, there's certain things we can do to change, but without a cultural change, it might be tough to change the way we thinking about a problem, or addressing the need for new innovation, right? So how do you think about the impact on the banks, or in this case banks, perspective of not corporate culture, but model risk management culture, or what we because it's right now you're looking at it from a perspective of we started off everything was MRM, was viewing it from a purely regulatory requirement, right? But if you look at Gen AI, the risk is not just the ones that we've seen from the traditional statistical models. Now you're seeing other stakeholders coming into play, or with other skills, right? You have legal caring about everything from copyright to patent infringements and other things. You're looking at data privacy. The InfoSec team is sort of getting heavily involved. So how do you see the dynamics and the need for, or not for, cultural change inside sort of the MRM ecosystem?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think really one of the critical questions that hopefully is top of mind for all of our CRO and head of MRM friends. It's really fundamentally a challenge for management. So I think it's very important to understand and be respectful of the fact that in the modern day, the modern day MRM function faces a classic problem of asymmetric incentives, right? If they give a green light to a model that then misbehaves and maybe even costs the bank money, they've got a big problem. On the other hand, all of the models that they approve that perform well, they don't get credit for. The models that they reject and were never put into production, half the time people are thinking, if only we could have gotten that model out in production, everything would be so much easier. Who knows? Maybe not. So I think and then you also raised a very important point, that under Gen AI, because of things like unique InfoSec issues, unique issues of potential bias in the models, and by which I mean discriminatory bias, not statistical bias, et cetera, it brings them in contact with a much broader set of stakeholders than they necessarily would have dealt with in the past, right? So I think the challenge for management, really, and I'm going to admit, I don't think I have a silver bullet answer today, but I think the challenge for management is, how do I get the organization and also get MRM to think of themselves as partners in delivering business value, right? How do I break the the delays, frankly, the occasional lack of agility, et cetera, that almost inevitably results from facing an asymmetric sense of asymmetric set of incentives, and create something that looks much more like a true business partnership across MRM, model development teams, front office teams, compliance teams, legal teams, et cetera. It's not an easy question. It's an important one. I might be glad that's somebody else's job.
Well, I think I mean, you're right. I think it does fall on the management, right, to address this. But I think it's an important question that should be brought up and discussed more broadly. I've only seen this as a topic at one other conference in the past, where the cultural change was sort of brought up as a discussion point. Other than that, everything up till that point has been, and still is, a lot focused on, we've been talking about the practical challenges with the change, and some technical challenges, but we sometimes seem to overlook the cultural impact on the MRM process itself, the teams that are responsible for making sure that models are safe to deploy, and sort of the widening of stakeholders that might be involved to approve and sign off on these things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the key issue. Sorry to cut you off, but I think that just the fundamental reality, right, is the traditional MRM process has been too slow for organizations to get the full value out of these new technologies. It has to go faster. It just has to. And the only reason to make it go faster is just to have a very honest reflection on why it's been slow in the past. And part of that is technology, right? And leveraging technology more effectively to get more potential productivity per person, right? That's part of it. But another part of it is culture. And my personal view is that culture is overwhelmingly driven by incentives, right? Mm-hmm. So how do we rethink the incentives to drive the culture that will lead us to be faster, stay competitive, right?
That's a good point. That's a really good point. Because my experience is that culture comes from the top.
Yep.
And although I know many people sometimes would prefer that it came from the bottom, the corporate culture usually comes from the top, right? So again, to your point, what incentives does management have to make that change, to make sure that the new culture reflects the need of the bank across all functions, but also specifically with regards to the adoption of AI inside the bank. So I think we can see if we've got any questions in the chat.
Hey, Jonas, no questions, but this has been a fantastic conversation. We'll obviously be sharing out the replay and have that available both on YouTube and LinkedIn. But thank you so much to those of you who tuned in for our ValidThoughts webinar. And also thank you to our guests, to Jan Larsen, to Jonas. Thanks so much for joining us, taking the time today to talk about these topics. Really interesting stuff. So looking forward to digging even deeper into it. Now, if you like what you heard and you want to learn more, visit us at validmind.com. We'll be back with another ValidThoughts episode soon. So be sure to follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube, and have a great day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Jan. Good to see you.
Likewise.